Once you introduce more information and you clear up the picture, I think that you can give people the tools to see the lack of logic in the person you're trying to argue against, period. And you can, I think, help set the narrative to an audience who've never gotten that narrative. Because a lot of people were watching Jimmy Dore, a lot of people watching Tim Pool or anybody else that's getting paid by the Russians through shell companies. Once you can set the narrative in a way before they even get out with the disinformation, then you have sold something to the audience they might have not ever heard before.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of On the Edge. This week we're talking with Dylan Burns. Now, Dylan is a young guy starting out on a journalism career, but his media landscape is far different than the one I started my journalism career in all those years ago. There are, of course, similarities. I do have hope for the future of journalism in this new environment. But there are, of course, differences too. And that's what I wanted to talk to him about. I wanted to talk to him about spending hours and hours online streaming in the middle of the night because your audience is primarily in the States. I wanted to talk about debating with other streamers and influencers, pushing back on the various Moscow disinformation campaigns that are out there. And of course, I wanted to talk to him about what it's like to do on-the-ground news gathering these days. We talk about all of this, and I hope you find it very informative. But boy, do I feel old. Anyways, please enjoy. Thank you for coming into the studio today, Dylan.
Happy to be here.
So look, you're kind of at the beginning of your career in journalism. I'm farther down the road, and as a matter of fact, kind of was in the efforts of kind of semi-retiring before this war started, and I felt obligated to be here.
Pulled you back in.
Pulled me back in, exactly right. The media landscape that you are going into is completely different than the one that I started in. When I started and got my first overseas posting, it was in Moscow, and I had to find an employer. I had to, go. And now I filled in for somebody who was on maternity leave. But then I kind of grew what we used to call strings, our different strings that you could contribute to, and if you didn't have a full-time job as a freelancer. What you're doing is completely different than that. You are self-publishing. You're putting stuff out on social media. You're doing hours and hours of streaming. You get grassroots support from your viewers. Explain to an old fart like me, how do you make this work as a foreign journalist?
Well, I started not in the traditional media. I started as a streamer. I started 18 in 2020 after, Trump is facing, losing power, January 6th coming around the corner. Democracy in a lot of ways was kind of in crisis. And it interested me to cover this. And I was also interested in politics already. So I wanted to talk about it online. And so I started talking about it online. And enough people started tuning in with some commentary that I gave that eventually I had enough of a viewership that I could end up buying my own apartment off of it, paying my bills, and I was going to school full time and I was doing, streaming full time. But that was a really full schedule. And eventually it was just too much for me to bear. And around that same time where it was too much for me to do school and too much for me to do the streaming at the same time, the Russian invasion of Ukraine happened. And I always had a concentration in foreign policy and being interested in geopolitics and foreign affairs. When I was in high school, I was taking classes in international relations at the University of Maryland and some specialty programs, so you could take some classes early. And I really grew an interest in IR, international relations theory and stuff like that. Not of the Mearsheimer School, of course, but of IR. And when the invasion happened, a lot of people jumped into my chat to ask questions about the war. And I could explain basic stuff, but a lot of the details of it, I couldn't explain. The experts that were listening to, I was saying, man, it's crazy because the Ukrainians are resisting on the streets of Kiev, and they're resisting here, and they're resisting there, and the Russians were supposed to take this like a week ago, but it hasn't happened. But all the experts assure me that this is going to collapse soon, and then it didn't happen. And so I either got inaccurate inputs of information, I was getting bad advice, but for whatever reason, there were big conclusions that experts were making that did not come to fruition.
Right.
And so if I wanted to give good coverage, once I had this inflow of some extra cash from this new viewership that was coming, I saw it like I had two options. One, I could get a studio and I could improve my coverage in the United States by having better production quality, maybe 4K footage, stuff like that. Or I could try to improve the inputs, the quality of the content, even if it's not the same, the best footage or it's in the best studio, the quality of the conversations we're having, the quality of the topics we're talking about, the quality of the information input, that mattered to me more. And so I made the decision to do the latter, because if I can't get accurate information from even some of the best learned military academy people or, IR theorists, then the best thing I think I could do is just go on the ground and talk to the people myself, then instead of having somebody else do it for me.
Right.
Now, starting out here was a big shift from hosting like online political debates with random people, which is a lot of what I did. And I didn't have any traditional media connections to CNN, MSNBC, CBC, nothing. Mm-hmm. And so I went in there and I had no clue I was going to get credentials. I really just took a big jump, a big risk. And some buddies of mine, Patrick Hillsman, who's done some good reporting in Syria, a few others, they started to show me the ropes, give me advice about what I would need to do. I started, taking certain, learning about different safety things, tourniquet and what to do in a situation where you're getting bombed. And eventually I was able to get
HEFAT, hazardous environment, first aid training, right?
Of course.
HEFAT.
Of course.
Yeah.
And once I feel like I had my bearings enough, I was able to get a small outlet to take a risk on me through the word of Patrick Hillsman.
Okay.
And that outlet was Offbeat Research, because as much as I knew I could self-publish or I could attempt to self-publish, the paperwork stuff here, writing, I am a YouTuber, give me access to the army, is not going to be that convincing.
Right.
And so I had to make deals where it's like, okay, I'll give you 2 articles a year on the condition that I can now use these credentials to now do 4, 5, 6 pieces for myself. And because it was a smaller outlet and it wasn't CNN or MSNBC, and the smaller outlet had more of an idea of what I was doing as a streamer and more respect to it than I would say a traditional outlet probably would, I was able to make that sort of a deal that CNN would never make with me.
No.
And so it gave me the flexibility to be able to sell articles when I need to, but also work on the content for my channel completely independent of CNN with those credentials. On top of the fact that the best part of the deal, and that's why I got to give all the credit to Jet, who's the guy who manages me over at Offbeat Research, I still have the rights to use all the footage that I sell them. Everything that I sell them, I can still use. And so for the mega projects I'm working on, when I'm filming here for 3, 4, a long time, to make these really big projects, the idea of having to fight CNN over the rights of the stuff that I filmed on the front is just completely unappealing.
So it sounds to me like you did seek out an organization to be a representative of.
Yes.
But mainly for legitimacy concerns, not for financial.
No, they give me a good deal now for the articles that I sell, because when I wrote articles for them, the metrics were good enough that they'd be willing to, reciprocate on some level. And it is good to have that extra pocket cash, but I see it as, getting extra pocket cash. Oh, I need to buy some new equipment. I'll sell an article, or I'll sell 2 articles. And then a few months later, I can use the footage for my own project anyways. And so for me, it was like the perfect deal.
Yeah, win-win. But the vast majority of the work that I see you putting out is your hours of streaming on the various platforms, and and getting that Patreon support or Buy Me Coffee or whatever these various crowdsourcing outlets are. I mean,
it's directly to DylanBurns.tv actually.
There you go.
Because people talk about like Twitch donos, people talk about YouTube like subscribers and memberships and all these different things. These are okay, but a lot of people don't know Twitch takes half of every single sub. It's $5 per sub, you get $2.50 out of it. To me, that's an atrocious rate. And there's not a lot of streaming companies that have that rate. It's just Twitch didn't have the competition, and so they didn't have to offer better rates. Now they're starting to let people do dual streaming. Now there's more competition on the block. It ain't what it used to be. They don't got the monopoly anymore. But on my website, everything they donate to me goes straight to me. So while I do get YouTube income, and that is useful, I do get Twitch income. In my experience, being able to have my own platform where I get 100% of the cut has been extremely beneficial, and I couldn't have done this without it.
So, I mean, now that and also now you've got the cachet. You've been on the ground here a long time. There's a handful of folks doing it. I mean, I'm here, you're here. There's you can probably count them on.
Well, it depends. Like if you talk about the
people.
Domestic press, there's people here doing it all the time.
Sure.
But in the foreign press, most people are not here for more than 3-4 months. Most people are here for a week or two, then they go back to their family and move on to the next story in Syria, Lebanon, wherever it is.
And then the networks will rely mostly on the agencies that do have kind of full-time presence here. They'll just take the footage and
purchase some stuff off Getty Images.
And then turn it around. So it's frustrating to me that's the state of the industry, that it's guys like us who have to kind of do this when really it should be the larger outlet guys. But it's expensive.
Yeah, it is expensive. And when you're running 24/7, you need that's a lot of content to fill. You would think that they would be super eager to have agents out all the time. But yeah, it is cheaper to have local people experience something, record it on their phone, get that footage from them for free, not have to pay a local correspondent that, somebody's working with your outlet. Definitely it's not just a question of direct pay. It's also a question of liability. I've seen these people have their lawyers come out and be like, you can't be here because there's no bunker. You can't be here. And to me, that's extremely frustrating. I couldn't do that. I remember when I was in Balaklia, I lived for a month with demining crews because I wanted to understand what they lived like, what their life was like. And I thought a 24-hour in bed wasn't enough. So I spent a month with them, lived with them, slept with them, as in the same
best way to get to know them.
Yep.
Best way to get the story.
Yeah. And when I was over there and I was doing all of this, I would see either other NGOs come out or other organizations, other people, and Balaklia, relatively speaking, is pretty safe. Now, when it comes to the explosives, dug in the ground, but the Russians are not targeting Balaklia. It's not a big strategic target. But I would listen to these guys come out, these lawyers, and say, you can't stay here in Balaklia to the people that they have liability contracts with because there's no bunker, and technically by the rule set that we have, you have to be in a bunker. So go back to the safer city of Kharkiv. The safer city of Kharkiv, it might have bunkers there, but most people don't go into the bunkers, and it's much more likely to be targeted. So in my view, Balaklia was safer, but because of the checklist they had to go down in liability concerns.
Because there's a lawyer somewhere.
Yeah,
I know exactly that kind of frustration. You also do a lot of debating online.
Quite a bit.
I tried it. And I quickly got sick of it because I ended up talking to people who have absolutely no firsthand experience of either Ukraine, Russia, or war.
That's most of the people talking about this.
Yeah. Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. I mean, what's the benefit of talking to these guys, and what kind of guys do you normally run up against?
So when I got into politics, debate for me was like part and parcel of politics.
Sure.
Because the people that I was either looking up to or the people that I immediately started working with when I was 18, a lot of them debated all the time. And in fact, the best viewership they would get, some of the best content they would make, some of the stuff that would get the most engagement, period, was their debates, was their conversations. Not even only with, say, the top intellectuals in the space. Usually they're not there.
Why do you think that is? Do you think it's kind of the kind of the clash that people are attracted to?
People like to see ideas and individuals put under pressure, because when you put under pressure, you get to see how that idea really performs compared to alternatives, and you get to see if there's any cracks that are going to form.
Right.
If somebody says, for example, this is just an example, I support the death penalty because we need to bring down crime rates. And in a normal conversation, just throw that out there, you might understand, okay, that's their position. If somebody responds with, I have data here that shows that it doesn't, well, now the conversation is completely shifted. You don't just have this one idea in the ether. It's now being tested. It's being put under scrutiny. It's being peer reviewed by the general public under pressure from your contemporaries. And so in that way, you can test people, you can test ideas, and it also tends to bring more people to watch it. Why? I think people like conflict. I think people like drama.
People
I
are
think
drawn
those are
to the
definitely
drama and the conflict. Absolutely.
primary ones.
But when you're talking to these guys in particular,
Yeah.
Not just the idea of debate and what debate is and why it's so important, but these guys in particular, the so-called tankies, the guys that have never been here, and yet because they have access, maybe they have access to open source intel, or they're sure that they understand this because they've read this, that, or the other thing, or they listen to Mearsheimer, or they listen to Snyder, or whatever it is, wherever they think they're getting their information from. You're on the ground in Ukraine talking to these guys who have no firsthand on the ground experience. I mean, do you find that a benefit in that scenario, or has it been really kind of frustrating, or what are those encounters like with these guys? Because they don't really know what they're talking about oftentimes, I find.
I think that for me, when I talk to somebody, I don't talk to somebody, definitely when I'm doing a show, mostly when I'm doing a show, under the idea that my goal here is to convince this individual that has decided to come in public and debate me over the issue that I'm right. Because the odds are I'm not going to. If you're willing to go in public in front of a camera and say you're wrong, X, Y, and Z, that means you probably really believe it. And even if you did get your mind changed, it's pretty embarrassing to say this thing that I just said with extreme conviction an hour ago was completely wrong. You've just proved me wrong. I changed my mind. Slava Ukraini. That's not something that happens often. But the people who are watching, primarily maybe their audience, if they're like a big streamer, or individuals who might be undecided, or people who, because everybody has doubts in their beliefs. I have doubts in their belief. Everybody has doubts in their beliefs. People who might have doubts like, I heard this one thing about I don't know, Prince Yaroslav's horse took a shit in Kiev once, so the Russians own it. Something along those lines. And I think that in these environments, you can give people the tools for them to see the lack of logic in the ideas yourself. Because if it's based on a lack of research, and somebody believes something just because, for example, Victoria Nuland organized a coup in Kiev. If you tell people hey, that deal she was trying to negotiate that, they forced, the Ukrainian protesters didn't accept it. And then they had different talks, different negotiations. If it was a American-controlled coup, why were they not following American order? Once you introduce more information and you clear up the picture, I think that you can give people the tools to see the lack of logic in the person you're trying to argue against, period. And you can, I think, help set the narrative to an audience who've never gotten that narrative. Because a lot of people were watching Jimmy Dore, a lot of people watching Tim Pool, or anybody else that's getting paid by the Russians through shell companies. I think a lot of these people have only heard one narrative from their alternative media space, that they have a small collection of streamers they listen to, and every one of them probably agrees roughly on the same thing. Maybe not all of them, but a lot of them do. And they might have not heard of, the Yanukovych regime tried to make protesting illegal. You remember the Heavenly 100. Do you know about the Heavenly 100? Oh, you say that, there was a CIA coup. Where's the CIA money? There's been nothing proven of the CIA money. Yeah. Once you can talk about the narrative, okay, what about instead of this being like Russophobia, this has to do with anti-corruption? What about instead of this just being crazy NATO imperialism, and that's why the Ukrainians are out there because they got paid by the CIA? It might have to do with the fact that Yanukovych in the middle of the night pulled out of the association agreement to suppress dissent after promising to do it on the campaign trail. Maybe people were angry at the dishonesty. Maybe they weren't paid by the CIA, that they had a love of their own country and wanted to see it benefit. Once you can set the narrative in a way, before they even get out with the disinformation, then you have sold something to the audience they might have not ever heard before.
Yeah, absolutely. So not so much about the debate itself, but the fact that by imparting that information, maybe that person you're debating, that person's audience might pick up on it. I understand that completely.
Also, people love watching idiots get humiliated in some way.
There's that too, yeah. And there are a lot of idiots out there, especially regarding this conflict. But then you also are probably, let me ask, have you encountered kind of Russian bots, trolls, stuff that is directly, have you come under fire from
I
You
mean,
know,
like the bots, like it's just bots, they're just like, oh my gosh, the warm water port in Texas is so important. We should have independence. Like this is okay. Nobody cares.
right.
Okay. Um, I do worry about them boosting like accounts or like disinformation that doesn't deserve
Well,
it.
as
Like
we saw
something that's a
recently with
complete
the 10
lie.
pools and
Yeah, getting
the
5,000
cash.
likes and that stuff does worry me. And I do call it out. But the stuff that I get is usually from real people, not from bots. And it's either stuff that's angry about, some personal characteristic of me, some character flaw to trying to extend. This is why Dylan supports Ukraine. It's because, Dylan supports LGBT hysteria or whatever. So I'll get some like attacks on my like personal life, my, relationship life, something like that. Or, just death threats, I know like Jackson Hinkle was wishing that I blew up after like a close call once when a Shaheed went over my building. But I don't think these people have any moral character. If they agree, if Jackson Hinkle was saying, "Oh, I hope Dylan's happy and healthy," I'd consider jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge because I must be doing something wrong.
Yeah, he's particularly egregious, that one. There's the other thing also, those is that when I see a information campaign that is clearly being disseminated by Russia and picked up by the Jimmy Dores, Jackson Hinkles
And
of
financed.
the world, and financed and paid to put it out there and spread these lies. The one that always gets me the most is the constant videos of like guys getting grabbed off the street
Mhm.
as if they've taken the king's shilling and they're about to be grabbed in the street, shoved off into a military base, given a weapon, shaved their head, and off to the front they go. When a lot of times what that is about mobilization. You're in violation of you haven't properly registered with mobilization, so but they will spin it in a way. So there's, and that's obviously not always the case. And I've done a little research on my own about it, about how, the guys who are in violation of mobilization rules and registering for mobilization do tend to be kind of the first guys that get called up when they do conscription. But that's a discussion for another time. The point I'm trying to bring up is that this narrative gets put out in the information sphere, and you must see it from the guys that you debate all the time going, yes, but did you see this, or did you see the massive explosion of a glide bomb here, or did you see all the Ukrainian soldiers who are dying here, there, or the other place? It must mean that they're about to collapse any day now, sort of thing. How do you combat you can debate somebody who's an idiot, and you can disprove their points, but if they're constantly regurgitating this stuff, and how do we combat that? Do you think?
The way that I describe it is that, and this is foul, but it's a lot easier to smear feces on the wall than clean it off. If you come in and you smear your little 5-year-old smears poop on the wall, you spend like an hour cleaning it up and you're done, and you turn around and all 3 of your walls are covered head to toe.
It's a good analogy.
It's gonna take you a while, and by the time you finish, there's gonna be even more possibly. And I have these debates where somebody will come out and be like, yeah, when the CIA coup in Kiev happened,
and just take it as
and then the Azov guys killed the 100 people in Ukraine, and then they bombed all the civilians and they committed the genocide in Eastern and they'll throw them out so quick with no supporting data, no supporting evidence,
fact,
just to throw it out as if it's
as gospel.
Solid, undisputable fact,
right?
Because they didn't even feel a reason to explain, like, here is a study from some organization proving genocide. No, they just throw it out, and then your job is to sit there and knock it down. The problem with allowing that to be you're basically working as Snopes, and every single time you speak, they push up your glass and say, actually, you're allowing them to set the narrative. Even if you knock down 1 or 2 pillars in their argument, as long as they can paint a picture, you're sitting there cleaning up their crumbs while they're the ones being able to set the tone of the conversation. It's important to knock it down. And I think it's important that when you find something like that, like a really shaky pillar, you grab it, you shake it, and you yell to everyone possible, look at this. If this wasn't, this is completely nonsense. It's built on a shaky foundation. You need to hit it hard, quick, be as simple as possible in explaining to an audience that might not know the terminology you have, and then set your own narrative. As quickly, you need to knock it down, and don't just spend the whole time knocking stuff after stuff after stuff, getting as much data out there as possible. You've got to set your own narrative, or you're just going to be playing cleanup work the whole time.
Right. Yeah. Well, look, your work has certainly gotten a lot of attention. And you've been called upon to talk to a lot of different streaming, sites that are very prominent. I mean, do you feel that you're getting the message from Ukraine from a perspective I'm sure we share in that, we're here in Ukraine and supporting the Ukrainian cause? Do you feel that you're getting any traction?
I think that my audience definitely is. My audience is very devout in trying to follow the war and pay attention to everything. And I think it's good that I'm getting a message to them. When I can go on other platforms and talk to people,
Right.
I feel like I can get information to those who have not heard it before. When I talk, for example, I remember I go to this libertarian convention called LibertyCon to talk about the war, and I'm talking to libertarians about the war in Ukraine.
Right.
And I usually just focus on the facts, but it eventually, inevitably goes over to, well, should we be supporting them? And something that I noticed that really seemed to work with libertarians is the idea that we made an agreement with the Ukrainians that if they were to give up these nuclear weapons for our benefit, for the benefit of the world, then we would help them in a situation like this. And we did this at the interest of our own security, at the interest of Europe's security, and at the interest of nuclear nonproliferation, which is an agreement that everyone can agree to. And you can't go from, oh my God, World War III to saying nuclear nonproliferation doesn't matter. You can't keep both of those
and
values
libertarians
consistent.
tend to, at least in my experience, be ones for like, if there is a treaty, if there is a written agreement, then we should abide by it.
And so for me,
they
that
do
was
tend to be a little more isolationist in my experience, but also at the same time, like very respectful of if there is a signed agreement, then we should be obliged to stand by it. So
yeah, and I think if you argue, like for example, that'll be something that I think works, but
you can find common ground.
And I can find common ground. But if another thing is if someone comes to me like, well, I don't like Iraq and I don't like Afghanistan and I don't like all these wars, and now you're here to me talking about another forever war. I think defining the differences between Iraq and Afghanistan, because I think a lot of people, definitely if you're not interacting with these conflicts, and it was like, oh, at one point there was a war in Iraq, now there's a war in Ukraine, now there's a war in Afghanistan, and all to you from a distance, these are all just different wars, explaining the differences between an offensive war to topple a regime and a defensive war with a country that we made an agreement with, a country that is right next to a NATO ally that if any country was invaded, then we would directly be dragged into the war. A war that, while as much as we hear in the media of like, oh, Joe Biden got us involved in this mess, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How many American soldiers have died here? 0 American soldiers have died here. That's a big difference between this, Iraq, and Afghanistan, is that this costs us much less in Iraq and Afghanistan and like invested value. We're largely investing, or in large part investing, old gear we were going to have to decommission anyways.
Yep.
And it's, for me, it's, surprise people with stuff they haven't heard before. Don't try to sell the same bill of goods that they've probably heard 100 times in a way that maybe you think if you just be a little bit more aggressive. If that hasn't worked before, then it might be better to just try something completely new, something that appeals to their interests.
Yeah. And you do think you're having some success.
I change my arguments or my discussions about the war, going to different environments. But also my goal isn't just to convince people. If my goal was just metrics, I would do this totally differently. I wouldn't spend my time interviewing demining crews because let me just say, it's not the most popular podcast topic is the humanitarian issue of demining and cluster munitions usage.
So moving away from the whole kind of media landscape and debating people and all the stuff that you do with your site and on Twitch and all the rest of it, you actually do go out and do news gathering. The sharp end of the spear, as it were. You mentioned your work with the demining program. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. It was with emergency service workers, CESU. Their job in large part, well, that covers like firefighters and a bunch of people. The people that I was working with were emergency service deminers. And so what they do is, let's say a territory is liberated, taken back from the Russians, like Balaklia, there's a lot of explosives that are left behind. And it's
Mhm.
not just like artillery shells and stuff like that are unexploded, but a lot of TM62 anti-tank mines, a lot of anti-personnel mines. And the ways that these things get spread is to cover as much ground as possible so breakthroughs cannot happen. And so when you're spreading those many anti-tank mines, this type of work is going to take years. When you take these PMF1 butterfly mines, also known as pedal mines, these little plastic toy-looking
they
things,
almost look like a toy.
and it's
kind of a
notorious
plasticine.
because in Afghanistan, when the Soviets invaded, they
Yep.
dropped so many of them, and these little Afghan children had no clue that these little pieces of plastic were mines. They'd go up, pick them up, and they'd blow off their arm.
Yeah.
And the way that those are spread is they fire these rockets that dispense them over the area. That's almost like a soccer field. And when I was in the Balaklia area, I saw those mines less than 50 feet from occupied home where babushkas were living. I saw TM62 anti-tank mines in people's backyard where people had to check if they were booby trapped or not, because a lot of these I'm sad to say, but yeah, a lot of these demining guys, they get hurt because they'll have one TM62 anti-tank mine and there'll be two stacked under it. And so when they flip the first one, the two other ones
I've heard
go
about
off,
that technique,
which makes it a lot harder. It slows down the process and it injures a lot of these guys. And let me say, not everybody can do this type of work. Not everybody can wake up every day and disable mine after mine after mine into mine. When you look at these guys, most of their work is finding the mines. It's not disabling the mines, which on one hand, you would be like, oh, well, that means most of the time they're not handling explosive. But that means most of the time they're walking through mine-laden fields with a little stick in their hand, poking the grass, and that's what they have at their disposal. And they're not the first one to get drones. They're not the first one to be prioritized for the equipment because they're not the ones fighting on the front line. And so they have to rely on a lot of fundraisers, even though a lot of times the leadership in CESU don't like it when they have to do that because it's embarrassing. And so it creates a bad dynamic because no leader wants to be embarrassed.
Right. Yeah. And how much time did you spend with them?
I spent a month with them. I lived with them for a month.
Yeah, that must be that. Well, see, that's the way to do it. I mean, you really got to really get the story. You got to.
And a little bit of alcohol poisoning.
Yeah, I'm sure more than just a little.
Yeah, but the demining guys,
oh, I'm sure.
You think, if they drink and the next day they say, we're not doing it, we're hungover, who's going to say, you're fired, I'll do your job? Nobody's doing that.
Yeah, nobody's lining up to go try and dig for mines. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it is one of the most, I saw a statistic somewhere where this is now the most mined stretch of the planet.
1/3 of the country is covered in mines. And from my discussions with CESU deminers, the implication they were giving me is that it'll take about 75 to 100 years to remove all the mines that have been placed. Now, the majority of the mines will probably be removed before that point, but the main problem was always finding the mines. And there's some interesting technology and innovation in this field. Drones have really changed the game. They make it a lot safer to remove mines because then you can see what type of mine it is from a distance. You can scan the field beforehand. But the AI introduction, now I'm not a big fan of AI art or whatever. I don't really care about this. The one thing AI that I'll say that has been good is that there seems to be progress when it comes to having these drones go out in the fields and by using AI algorithms, image identification, to see the there's a little spot there that looks like a mine, and then they'll mark it. And then they'll go over the entirety of this field, and then they'll mark 50 mines with an AI algorithm that they can then send and go disable. These are innovations that might be able to shorten the amount of time. People keep talking about ground penetrating radar, but I mean, they've been talking about ground penetrating radar for years.
Yeah. But I think it was you. I don't know if it was you or somebody else who also told me one of the innovations that drones allow is thermal imaging, because if you go over a field at night, Earth will cool at different temperatures than the metal. So you can. Did you know that?
I never did.
Tell me that story. Somebody told me that story.
I felt like living with Balaklia deminers was enough. I think going in the minefields at nighttime might have been a little bit.
Drone. The drones can fly over.
Yeah, I got the idea.
Yeah.
I'll say though, one thing when it comes to these CESU deminers is that they're incredible people. I try not to like gush over these people, but they genuinely love their country. They genuinely want to benefit their country. They're constantly working to get these mines out. And I have nothing but positive things to say about the demining crew guys. And they lose a lot
Yeah.
of guys doing this. So I really have nothing but pure respect for them.
Yeah.
And a big shout out to Vlad Sokolov, who's done a lot of good work and has gotten a lot of heat. I won't say from who, but for the type of work he's done.
Vlad Sokolov.
He's a Sesu deminer.
Okay, great. And if people look up your material, you spend some time directly.
I filmed basically a demining documentary with them a year ago, but I've been so busy with other stuff that it's a project that I have on the back burner. And I mean this
to
with
revisit
to revisit, and I mean this with all good intention. That problem isn't going anywhere.
No,
right? The Battle of Kursk a little different. The Battle of Kupiansk a little different. The mines are there. They're going to be there for years. So yeah. I can take my time to be careful with this project.
Yeah. And then another one of the projects that I know you worked on was with guys who go into towns that are being evacuated. They're either, they're going to fall into Russian hands or they're going to come under fire from the Russians. And there's a documentary you did about a guy who kind of goes into these towns to convince people who are, for a variety of reasons, reluctant to evacuate. Tell me a little bit about that reporting that you did.
Yeah, so I was in Kherson right after the Novokakhovka Dam was destroyed.
Right.
And the flooding was horrible. And it didn't get, I don't know how much attention it got really, but at the time, like the environmental minister was talking about like 30,000 animals drowning. And so I found some people when I went down there who wanted to go do primarily animal rescue, also human rescue, but they concentrate on like animal humanitarian efforts. And they did, they were helping people go to check that their pets didn't all drown and maybe they're on the roof to bring them back and stuff like that. Getting into Kherson was hard because it was the first time that before I entered a city that in order to enter the city, they checked my body armor was stable. And within 48 hours of the dam blowing up, the Russians were constantly shelling the city. And so I go out there to, film rescue efforts on the shoreline on this boat with a crew of German aid workers. They go out on the water with this boat that was given to them by a local coordinator because you couldn't use the plastic boat that they brought anymore they didn't want it to pop and then it would sink and then they'd have to rescue the rescue workers, which is not something you want to do.
Right.
But the problem was the boat that they gave was bogus. It didn't work. It didn't turn on. It was broken, but they didn't know that until they were already on the water and they're trying to start it. And so they were stuck on the river in Kherson after the Novokakhovka Dam blew up with no engine and no way to like get back. So they do eventually get back, but then they start getting shelled by the Russians. And my friend John Jones gets hit in the stomach, a British expat who was driving the boat for them, and he hits the deck. Then this guy from Dnipro called Dima, who is the subject of the documentary in question, runs out with somebody else and helps drag him to the bunker before helping to transport him into a van and get him medical care. Yeah. The only knowledge I had of Dima before that was a conversation I had with a Christian aid worker when we were discussing the possibility of getting bombed by the Russians while doing this. And she said, "Oh, I know Dima will do it. He's crazy." And when the next few months was me trying to get to know this guy because when we did the follow-up interview for what happened, we just found out like how many people we evacuated from Mariupol, which is a quite significant amount of people. He evacuated people out of Svetohirsk during the battle. He was there during the Battle of Kupiansk when Kharkiv was taking it back, seeing the damage and stuff. And his story just kind of enamored me, and I wanted to get to know him. And I just also found him to be an interesting character. I remember when we went to Chasiv Yar, which is like the pinnacle of the documentary. It's the end of it. We go to Chasiv Yar to talk to people who refuse to leave, and some of which who would be classically defined as waiters, which are...
Yeah, this is the people who watch the documentary, and I encourage you to go check out the documentary. It's streaming somewhere.
It's on YouTube for free. Yep.
Yeah, go check it out. The title of it,
The Unevacuatables.
He does talk about these quote unquote waiters who are actually people who are sympathetic to Russia and they're just waiting for the Russians to take back that land, not, so that they can basically rejoin the Russian Federation. That does exist. Obviously, that does exist. But I've seen the documentary, and there's a lot of other reasons why people don't leave. They're just simply old. They
Absolutely.
don't want to leave. It's their home.
Yep.
They've got livestock, perhaps.
I mean,
They're
if you've
worried
lived
about
in this
theft.
village and you've never gone like 300 kilometers away from this village before in your whole life, and you're at like 82, and now you're told to drop your whole life,
Yeah.
and for the last years of your life, you're going to be living where? In a shelter in Kia. For a lot of people, it's insulting. It's if they've buried their kids there or their like husband or wife there, it can be very painful. There, of course, is the question of do they have the pension payments in order to actually survive in somewhere like Lviv or Kiev? Because a lot of people that I talk to really don't think they'd be able to. And so there's a lot of reasons outside of that, but some of them were that. And I think that by Dima being somebody from Dnipro, somebody who went to Russian language school as a kid, whose father fought in Chechnya and Afghanistan, he could relate to these people or try to convince them to leave better than I think a lot of the more traditional volunteer blue and yellow aid workers, maybe I would describe them as is typical. But the thing that I wanted to say about him is when we were going into Chasiv Yar, you get out like a few miles out to put on your body armor because you're not going to wear your body armor from Lviv. Okay, I'm not a 3-letter news agency. You're going to go out and you're going to have to put this on. And once we get out, he takes up this body armor. It's just busted. It's just broken. It's torn up. You can't wear it. And so he was like, oh, and he just puts it on. And then he just duct tapes it to his body. And he's like, let's go. And it's that passion for going out to save people, even at, I would say, at a time at the detriment of his own safety, and times that it just like almost a disregard for one's own safety. I'm not going to do any Freudian analysis of that, but it's not only fascinating, but I also think it's something I respect and fear because I couldn't do it. I would if I saw my body armor wasn't working, I'd wait a few more days.
Well, again, it's definitely worth a watch. And you've got some stuff that you're doing right now. You want to talk about a little bit about what you're working on right now? Not to do any spoilers, but
sure. I mean, I've got a bunch of projects coming down the tube. I've got a lot of articles for Offbeat Research. I'm going to be releasing some articles on tank embeds that I did with the T-72 crew, T-80 crew, T-64 crew. The T-80 crew interviews already interviewed. Most of the tank crews I've interviewed are piloting captured Russian equipment, by the way. 66% of the tank crews I've interviewed are using captured Russian gear. Yeah. I have a big drone documentary that I've already finished filming all of it. Basically all of it. I want to get something on the thermite drones, but it's really hard to get embeds on that because people are very hush-hush.
Yeah.
But that is something that I will release eventually. And we embedded with like recon UAVs, FPVs, Baba Yagas, grenade dropping drone, Mavics. Like we embedded with everyone. Or as many types of drones as we could. And we also interviewed some really bright people like Jimmy Rushton about the use of chemical weapons assisting in drones. That's something that's going to be released eventually.
When do you think that might be coming out?
Sometime
ballpark.
I'll just say sometime this year, right? Okay. I hope to release it by the end of the year.
Right.
Sooner, I have an embed with a mortar crew in Lipsy during the Russian Volchansk offensive that's going to be released probably in the next week and a half.
Great.
I'm really excited to release that.
What is your pattern of release? I mean, how the documentaries and the shows that you do are about how long? About an hour?
It varies. It varies because there was a huge gap, like a 6 months gap between me posting content recently, but that's because I was working on the Dima doc and it's over an hour long. Right. And I had to sort through a bunch of original footage from Mariupol, a bunch of original footage from Svetohirsk. We had to fact check it. We needed to make sure it was accurate. We needed to do a bunch of stuff. But when you talk like the new stuff, sometimes it's like a 15-minute piece. And so I can release one like every 2 weeks. If it's a longer piece, like the mortar piece, I thought was only going to be like 25 minutes. My editor came back to me and says over 40 minutes. And I'm like, okay, that's going to take more time. It depends on, we got to write the script. We got to fact check people because sometimes soldiers, and they don't mean to lie, but they'll say like, oh, this is this fast and they're exaggerating or this, and they're not really either because they've been told something that's not accurate, which happens more often than you think, or that, they're just pumping themselves up. And so I would like to release like one video at least every month. And I'd like to do at least one to two embeds every month.
Yeah. Well, good for you. Yeah, absolutely. And have you got like something you'd like to do? You're working on these projects you've got.
Man.
Is there something
I've been doing this for
moving
almost
forward?
3 years now.
Right.
And I'm going to be coming back next year, so it'll be going on 4 years before you know it, because I don't think this war is ending this year.
Sadly.
So I have this
Well,
problem.
if we give them the right amount of weaponry, maybe we can speed that up a significant amount. But
Now, even if we did, it wouldn't be this year.
This year, as in 24?
No,
No, it's not going to be 24. But in
uh,
the next 12 months, if we give them the proper weaponry, I mean, who's to say? This is why this argument that you were mentioning earlier of this, I'm so tired of forever wars. What I think one of the things that we need to do is to articulate to our audiences that no, this isn't a forever war. This is a winnable war if we just back them.
What gets me the most is I was listening to this EU parliamentarian yesterday, and he was talking to some podcaster, and he was a YouTuber politician elected in Cyprus, and he does polls decide how he votes. It's really strange stuff. And I was listening to him talk about the reason I voted against aid for Ukraine because I want the fighting to stop, and if we stop sending weapons to Ukraine, then they'll negotiate. But then if you were to just think about how Minsk 1 or Minsk 2 or how 2014 worked, you could think, well, what stops us from stopping, we stop the aid, and then the Russians say, oh, you don't have ammo? Great. And then they just keep pushing, and it'll be easier for them. Or that when they negotiate, if you genuinely, as the EU parliamentarian was trying to suggest, genuinely care about the Ukrainian people, you'd want them to have the most leverage possible in any negotiation. Even if you're not going to take back Crimea, then you want to get the best deal as close to that as possible that respects the local people, respects their future, because they're the ones that are going to have to live with this. You're living in LA. And what happens in Ukraine is not going to be as much of a day-to-day effect on your life, unless we really bungle it up, then the people are going to actually have to either give up their home in Donetsk or be able to return to it.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, so let's.
Well, you were asking me what I want. What I want to do.
Yeah. What do you want to do? What's a project on the horizon you'd like to go for?
After 3 years, I'm having a problem where I'm pitching stuff now, like Chernobyl during wartime. Chernobyl, just trying to figure it out. But I want to do maybe more anti-air stuff, like air defense, like the pickup trucks that people slap dushkas on the back of. That's kind of interesting to me. I do want to go to Chernobyl during wartime to investigate the claim that the Russians dug trenches in the Red Forest. I want to see if I can find where those trenches are, talk to people in the area.
It's bizarre. It's a really weird place. I've been to Pripyat, and it's...
I've never been, and I mean, I feel like I got the tattoo.
Really
if I don't go...
Oh, God, the stalker.
Yeah, if I don't go, then I'm a faker, you know? So I wanted to do that.
It's really bizarre. It's like stepping back in
time capsule.
Yeah, it really is, because they had to leave so quickly that it's almost like there's coloring books on. I don't know if it is not still like that,
like calendar set to the date and stuff like that.
And you can just tell that it seems like if you just removed all the kind of maybe the dust and the rust that.
It's part of the reason why I'm interested, because I'm interested to see how much the war disturbed that time capsule, to see if there has been some extra things entered into it.
That would be interesting. I go for it. Yeah,
and I want to go back to the Pokrovsk front, because I think it's important. I care a lot about at least documenting the future of Donetsk, and I want to go back there. Those are like the big three things that I think I'm concentrating on. Maybe I'll try some ed-bed with the police, because so far I've not become the biggest fan. I mean, loot's okay, but I have not become the biggest fan of the Ukrainian law system here when it comes to law enforcement. But maybe some direct interaction will change my mind. I doubt it, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly lots of work to do, and it's frustrating that it has to be somebody doing it kind of out of their own pocket, but or somebody taking it upon themselves, because I'm very critical of the way legacy.
You're a critic?
I am a very strong critic, having been in the belly of the beast and worked within the industry to see them.
Fox, am I right?
Fox,
you
CBS.
were co-hosting Tucker Carlson's show, and yeah.
No, I worked for lots of them. I was a proverbial gun for hire, but I did work in the
Rupert
in the
Murdoch's
belly.
hired thug.
Yeah, right. There you go. Well, look, I mean, keep doing the work that you're doing. Keep informing people and debating people and trying to set people right. And I think we're getting an
air raid
siren,
yeah.
so we probably should wrap it up. Dylan, thanks so much for coming by and talking to us about what you've been up to, and keep up the good work online, and try to keep those trolls and the tankies down as much as you possibly can, and maybe spread, or more importantly, spread a more honest truth from a place of understanding and actually having been here to the audience of those tankies and those idiots. So I appreciate you coming by and having a chat with us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And for everybody listening, remember one truth. Hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, okay? That's the only that is how we win, okay?
There you go. All right, good stuff. Thanks very much.